Beim heutigen Stande der Wissenschaft und der Technik ist der Bau von Maschinen möglich, die höher steigen können, als die Erdatmosphäre reicht. Bei weiterer Vervollkommnung vermögen diese Maschinen derartige Geschwindigkeiten zu erreichen, dass sie im Ätherraum sich selbst überlassen, nicht auf die Erdoberfläche zurückfallen müssen und sogar imstande sind, den Anziehungsbereich der Erde zu verlassen.
Ich habe dann mir dieses Buch beschafft und war entsetzt, dass es voller mathematischer Formeln war.
Ich fing an zu studieren und hatte nichts zu bieten als eine erhebliche Begeisterung für die Astronautik.
Many people thought we were crazy and we were wasting our time, but von Braun liked to say, a person is just a crackpot until he hits the jackpot.
I think it's probably basically a romantic drive that motivated me. But with romanticism alone, you don't build these things. They're pretty demanding with respect to perfection. They're pretty unforgiving too.
When I got to Peenemünde in 1940, the engine didn't work too well. Whenever we pushed the start button, normally the thing blew up.
This experience was very unique. We went just above the atmosphere at a maximum altitude of 83 kilometers and finally proved that our concepts were realistic. We immediately had the feeling that we opened the door into a big future and that just about logically everything else might follow out of that for going into real interplanetary space.
We also talked about the potential future. I personally was really influenced by the book that Professor Overt had written, where he talked already in those days about much more advanced activities than just launching V2s. He talked already about space stations. He talked about individuals floating around in free outer space. And every once in a while we talked about these things. I personally think this was the beginning of the present day space age.
Ein Sowjetzeichen soll er vor sich hertragen und wir werden in unserem Zeichen wieder siegen!
Here, in this hell, I thought that my life had passed and that the execution had taken place and that I was in hell. No.
We knew, I knew, and most of the people knew the name von Braun. He was, in my opinion, a son of a bitch. Of course, he had brains, he was a great man, he had something in his head, but he didn't care about what could happen to the poor guys who were there. He saw just the final result.
Remember, I was a very young man in Germany, and I was so busy with my rockets that maybe in retrospect I sometimes wonder whether I shouldn't have worried a little more about some of these aspects. And as I grew older, of course, and saw the ramifications, of course, also the suffering that's involved, you rethink some of these things. On the other hand, I do not believe that I'm all alone in this respect, because I think the early pioneers in aviation probably went to exactly the same thing. They wanted to fly, and they tried to find the money wherever they could get it to do these things.
That should never have happened. We built our rocket to hit the moon, but not to hit other people.
Now, we could very well have stayed and just waited for the Russian army to come in, but we elected to move west instead and get rolled over by the American army because we wanted to ultimately wind up in America.
Our intelligence sources had told us of the role Dr. von Braun and his Army Superior, General Dornberger, had played in the development of the V-2 program. I believe that the brains of these men, if we could find them, must be put to work on behalf of the United States. After all, they were the world's only experienced missile team. This was the beginning of Operation Paperclip. The President and the Congress were petitioned to return these so-called enemy aliens to Germany post-haste. But the United States had much to learn about rocketry. These men, dedicated and experienced, made very fine teachers. So we stood firm.
We didn't even know whether they would stay in this country. Technically, they were brought over as prisoners of war. And that was their status when I met von Braun at Fort Bliss.
Our rooms were quite primitive, but we came from war-torn Germany, and for us everything was freedom and fine.
The forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
Of course, the major topic was the future of Eastern Europe, and above all, Poland. Eastern Europe, important though it was only one of many other things. First of all, occupying Germany. Secondly, seeing to the war against Japan. Thirdly, the post-war arrangements.
President Truman decided that he would tell Stalin that we had a powerful new weapon without identifying it as a nuclear weapon. As we now know, they knew all about the Manhattan Project through espionage and their own agents.
The bomb was finally released exactly at the designated hour, and the explosion occurred as planned.
Analysis of the V-2 immediately after the end of the war clearly suggested that a rocket-powered long-range weapon might be a useful addition to a military arsenal. It didn't take long for military planners to note the possibility of long-range rockets armed with nuclear warheads.
I think what surprised us was that, considering the devastation which had taken place in the Soviet Union as a result of World War II, we didn't think they would be able to amass the necessary infrastructure to develop the bomb, but they certainly did, and they clearly were in our knicker, so to speak, more and more we learned how well they had infiltrated the whole of Manhattan Project.
A great global schism developed during these years. This political discord was based on two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, competing for the respect of the world in general and the unaligned nations in particular. Cold War was a state of high political tension and intense military rivalry. The United States and its Western allies versus the Soviet Union and its socialist satellite states. To defend themselves, the superpowers depended on the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. To deter either side from initiating a nuclear attack, both sides were committed to a full-scale nuclear counterattack, assuring the total destruction of both nations. Aerospace manufacturers responded to military requirements with rocket-powered ballistic missiles of ever-increasing range and accuracy. Thousands of ballistic missiles armed with nuclear warheads, created by the two superpowers and pointed toward each other. Scientists, particularly Russian and American, recognized that if it would be possible to use one of these new high-performance military rockets carrying scientific instruments to put a man-made object into orbit around the Earth, it would have a new perspective, allow accurate measurements, perhaps solving or at least shedding new light on some of Earth's mysteries. Both countries publicly announced that they were trying to develop an artificial satellite.
3, 2, 1, stretch!
They didn't recognize it at the time, but they had started a new competition, which eventually became known as the space race.
И они не смогли запустить. И когда мы запустили, вот такая заметочка в газете была, в «Правде». Запустили спутник, потому что мы сами не знали, что мы сделали. А весь мир, целые газеты посвящал запуску спутника. Так только на следующий день и наша газета посвятила спутнику большое дело. А сейчас...
Sputnik shocked the American public. We believed we were the most technologically advanced community in the world, and President Eisenhower tried to calm the waters.
I consider our country's satellite program to be well designed and properly scheduled to achieve the scientific purposes for which it was initiated.
He said his concern about our nation's security had not diminished one iota. Actually, he was probably very worried. A rocket that had the power and the accuracy to orbit a satellite had the power and accuracy to send a nuclear warhead across the ocean to a specific target.
All of a sudden, I mean, our confidence was just totally shaken down to the ground. You know, the Russians were our big enemy. So people were scared, but a lot of the kids in the United States at that time, we were excited. I mean, not that the Russians had done it, but that anybody had done it. Because we always imagined that maybe 100 years, a century away, or 1,000, maybe something would get into space. I mean, not even thinking about people in space, but just anything. Nobody even knew if it was possible. And so we started to kind of really identify with this. And I read in the paper where Sputnik was going to fly over Cold War. And I thought, I really want to see that. And so I told my mom, I'm going to go out tonight, Mom, and watch Sputnik fly over. And she told Mrs. Sherritt next door, who told Mrs. McLaughlin next door, who told Mrs. Todd. And that night, about half the town, it seemed like, was in my backyard.
But the Soviets continued to dominate the space race, winning heat after heat. In addition to the first satellite, they rocketed the first animal into orbit, the Russian dog Laika. The Soviets were the first to fly a probe around the moon and the first to send a remote-controlled craft to reach the surface. Their progress was astounding, and to many Americans, worrisome.
Good morning, gentlemen. Be seated, please.
I have a very important announcement for you. We've been assigned the mission of launching a scientific Earth satellite. I promised the Secretary of the Army that we would be ready in 90 days or less. Let's go, Wernher.
Well, those were rather hectic 84 days, I can assure you of that. A project like firing a satellite into orbit is only possible if there's splendid teamwork all the way through.
Not very many of us knew much of anything. What we knew was specialized. Some people may know trajectory, some may know a little propulsion, but nobody knew it all together. Von Braun, when you talk to him, you realize you're talking all facets of the subject, because he knew trajectory and guidance, he knew propulsion, he knew everything there was. And we were all amazed at how friendly he was.
And that, of course, was the first big step in this country when the Von Braun team developed and built the Redstone vehicle. That had much improved target accuracy. It was basically otherwise still a grown-up V2.
Hello, Len. You can send this off to the Secretary, that our satellite is definitely on orbit.
I'm convinced that the Russian concept, that's as demonstrated by Sputnik number 2 carrying this animal, they consider the control of space around the Earth very much like, shall we say, the great maritime powers considered the control of the seas in the 16th to the 18th century. And they say if we want to control this planet, we have to control the space around it.
We cannot and will not ever get into this race as we should, so long as all of our objectives are short-term objectives. We need a 10 to 12-year program that has as its ultimate goal the manned domination of space. And if we don't, we're going to be in trouble.
Public interest in these space activities was unbelievably high. Congress and the executive branch agreed that the United States should have an agency specifically dedicated to the exploration and exploitation of space. And so it happened that President Eisenhower signed the law creating NASA.
They were thinking about, and the rumor had come around, about sending someone up into space in a tin can or in a capsule on a big booster. As a matter of fact, they were very serious. I know now that they're looking at what kind of an individual do they want. But it was President Eisenhower that suggested to NASA to get military test pilots. They're used to testing new vehicles, and also they had security clearances, and some of the stuff was still classified. So NASA sent out a notice to both the Air Force and the Navy saying, please give us a list of the people who have the following criteria. Well, the Air Force and the Navy came up with 110 candidates.
I was a naval officer on the carrier Hornet. I got orders signed by CNO. The orders said, report to Washington at such and such a time, do not discuss. But I went to a briefing at the Pentagon, and that's how I heard about the NASA project.
We got up there, got the briefing. They're going to use an Atlas ICBM. They were going to put this Mercury capsule, put them on in orbit.
Well, when I was growing up, there was no such thing as astronaut. The word hadn't been invented yet, as far as I know. Space flight was something that was just Buck Rogers type novel writing, but nobody ever thought that it would seriously take place, and lo and behold, it took place in our time.
It ended up that 32 people went for the second phase, the Lovelace Clinic in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for this week-long examination.
We reported in, and they ran the most complete physicals you ever saw in your life. NASA was really going overboard on just trying to cover everything that they could measure in all these tests to see how you responded, not knowing exactly what was going to happen. We rode at 4 Gs, 4 times gravity, in the 25-foot arm centrifuge. Had a shake test on a vibration share where you shook again. The heat chamber, you had a rectal thermometer in that was remotely, they could read it outside. I think we're in the heat chamber at 135 degrees. Of course, there were whole batteries of psychological tests we went through.
When I made the finals, one of 7, NASA folks said, well, now, you'd better call your parents and let them know what you've been doing because your name's going to be in the paper tomorrow.
Well, of course, that was one of the happiest days of my life. That was the day in which we all congregated officially as the U.S. First Astronaut Group.
These, ladies and gentlemen, are the nation's Mercury astronauts. Which of these men will be first to orbit the Earth, I cannot tell you. He won't know himself until the day of the flight.
I'm John Glenn. I'm the lonesome Marine on this outfit, and I'm 37. In answer to this same question a few days ago from someone else, I jokingly, of course, said that I got on this project because it'd probably be the nearest to heaven I'd ever get, and I wanted to make the most of it. But my feelings are that this whole project with regard to space sort of stands with us now as, if you want to look at it one way, like the Wright brothers stood at Kitty Hawk about 50 years ago.
I think it's typical of most of us in this country. We're interested in new things. Aviation has been a new thing. Now it's a 50-year-old thing.
As far as my motivation is concerned, I feel that this is the future of not only this country, but the world. We've gone about as far as we can on this globe, and we have to start looking around a bit.
My career has been serving the nation, serving the country, and here's another opportunity where they need my talents, and I'm most grateful for an opportunity to serve in this capacity.
I wondered, first of all, where these 6 incompetent guys came from. It was not a surprise because several of them had been involved in the preliminary selection process. So I was generally familiar with their background. Glenn, of course, I had known before. Girard I had known before because of our Navy connections. So I knew there was a lot of talent there. I knew that it was going to be a tough fight to win the prize.
У меня была мечта вообще когда-то стать летчиком. Я стал летчиком, летал. Когда был первый спутник, конечно, появилась мечта и желание когда-нибудь на этом спутнике полететь. Но мы в то время, в 1957 году, считали, что это будет где-то лет через 20.
Приехали в полк 2 подполковника медицинской службы. Командир полка пригласил к себе и сказал: вот есть новая техника. Желаете ли вы летать на новой технике? Для этого надо комиссию пройти в Москве.
Хочу ли я летать на летательных аппаратах, которые гораздо летают быстрее самолетов и гораздо выше самолетов? Вот как тут понятие требуется, да? Ну и так далее. То есть, я так понимаю, посмотрели мое личное дело, я подходил по всем параметрам, решили мне предложить. Я не отказался, потом проходил медицинскую комиссию. Советоваться ни с кем я не мог, потому что попросили не раскрывать нашу маленькую тайну.
Вот, и сказали, что ввиду того, что у вас здоровье хорошее, товарищ Попович, мы вам предлагаем поступить в первый отряд космонавтов. Ну, вы представляете, какое у меня было состояние, я чуть не подпрыгнул до потолка, потому что я и не мечтал об этом.
Ну, хорошо, в принципе, раз вы согласны, идите подумайте, когда вы понадобитесь, мы вас позовем. Вот на этом, собственно, закончится разговор. Ну, а мне стало любопытно, что значит на спутниках летать.
То нас было 20 человек из 3000 летчиков в возрасте до 30 лет. Летчики-истребители, летающие на всех. Никто на Земле не знал, что будет.
И буквально где-то через пару дней, где-то через 2-3 дня, Сергей Павлович приехал к нам. Значит, такой головастый, лобастый, вот энергичный мужчина зашел и так ехидненько, так это самое у него, искорки в глазах такие. Он назвал нас любовно и поздоровался сразу с нами так: «Здравствуйте, орелики». Ну, мы ответили, конечно, по-военному: здравия желаем, Сергей Павлович. Так, он сел, говорит: так, вы смотрите на меня, и думает, главный конструктор пришел, и сейчас вам скажет, что полетит кто-то из вас где-нибудь лет через 5. Он говорит: так вот нет, а полетит кто-то из вас, говорит, в 61 году.
Он был очень энергичным человеком, вообще говоря, очень жестким по отношению к своим подчиненным, часто и грубым.
Сурдокамера, которая тоже, в общем-то, была для нас неизвестна, это полная изоляция, она, я знаю, что она, так сказать, неприемлема для многих землян, в общем-то. Это полная изоляция по звуку, газу, свету, общению.
Никого не слышно было и не видно.
Это Валентин Бондаренко. Это парень, который был тоже в составе первого отряда, в составе 20 человек. Это первая наша жертва. Он сгорел, погиб в сурдокамере, в которой я сидел 10 суток, и он сидел.
И он случайно этот спирт, намазанный, то есть намоченный, я говорю, вату, намоченный спиртом, уронил на плитку, и сразу вспыхнула вата со спиртом, вспыхнула вся камера.
И там две двери такие, они задраиваются, как на подводной лодке, таким штурвалом. И пока открыли 2 двери, он обгорел почти на 70%. И через 4 часа он скончался.
Ну, как вам сказать, шок не шок, но, по крайней мере, это было как гром среди ясного неба, в общем-то. Мы понимали, что где-то там еще на ракете можно что-то такое упасть, там, взорваться или там что-то такое. Но чтобы на земле, на тренировках, это, конечно, никто из нас и не думал, и не ожидал даже, что такое может быть.
Сначала работала секретарем, а потом для космоса это для меня были такие небольшие приборчики. Входишь в наш цех, она была самой первой комнатой на левой стороне, была самой старшей, а остальные все были 6 человек, моложе меня на 10 лет. И они приходили: девочки, здравствуйте, мы пришли. Мы всех знали, Гагарин, Титов, там, Николаев, всех, короче, мы их знали.
Тогда мне один из врачей приводит такую аналогию, что вы катаетесь на велосипеде? Я говорю, да. А на мотоцикле? Я говорю, да, у нас как... Вот, говорит, приблизительно такая же разница, как между велосипедом и мотоциклом, так между полетом на самолете и на ракете.
35, 36, 37, 38, но на 13-й секунде 8 я потерял сознание. Это произошло незаметно, только слышал звук ревущий, это сработали тормоза, и я опять пришел в себя. Пришел. Что было? Я говорю, я не знаю. Вначале потемнело все в глазах, расслабил.
Дышать практически невозможно. Уже начинается предел видимости зрения, уже начинается серение в глазах и очень большое давление на грудь и боль в груди. Нас врачи, конечно, спрашивали, ощущаете боль в груди. Все мы, конечно, дружно отвечали по очереди, когда спрашивают, что ничего не болит. Каждому всегда хочется быть первым, но я не мог претендовать на эту должность, первым быть космонавтом русского государства. Я сам по национальности чуваш, из Чувашской республики. Вот. И поэтому я всегда думал, в первую очередь должен лететь русский.
Конечно, мне очень хотелось быть, но я видел, что есть посильнее и как-то удачно. У меня в первое время характер был не очень, я бы скажу, с начальством не очень уживался, не всегда ладил.
Я понимал, что здесь придется не один раз, а десятки, сотни, тысячи раз летать вокруг шарика. И такая была мечта увидеть вот на нашу Землю сразу, всю и со стороны. Это было удивительно заманчиво и интересно.
The Russians were at least 2.5 years ahead of us at this time, and as they were demonstrated their abilities to consistently launch the rockets, we more often would blow up the rockets we launched. So engineers and people experienced in flight test and a small group of 31 Canadians and Englishmen joined with the Mercury 7 astronauts at a place called Cape Canaveral to form a space task group that would win supremacy in space.
The first launch any of us saw was pretty interesting. We'd just been in the program a short time. They took us down because none of us had ever seen a missile launch. We go down there, we're on a camera pad just 2,000 or 3,000 feet from the launch site. The Atlas is a very fragile vehicle. It's made out of 16,000 stainless steel. If you didn't have either pressure inside or something to hold it up, it would just collapse. And it's going to be a night launch. The searchlights are on, and it's almost like Hollywood, the steam coming off of it. Finally comes down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It lights up, and we're watching this thing go up and up and up. And it hit the highest area of aerodynamic pressure, and we're watching this thing go up, and all at once it blew up right over us. So as I recall, we looked at each other and wanted to have a meeting with the engineers the next morning.
Those 3 launches that we saw that ended so catastrophically, we called those the back to the drawing board launches.
That's right. We trained on the 50-foot centrifuge, and you're on the outer end of this thing, out on the end of the arm in a simulated spacecraft cockpit. And so we went up and trained on that thing and started going up and up in the G levels and got up to 16 Gs. Some of the other training we did 0 G flights in the C-131 and the F-100. We did survival training on sea and desert and jungle.
There were so many unknowns in those days. They were unknown unknowns. We did a lot of work that was unnecessary because we essentially didn't know at that time what we were doing.
We'd been in training for probably 20 months or so toward the end of 1960, early 61, when we all intuitively felt that pretty soon Bob Giroth had to make a decision as to who was going to make the first flight. When we received word that Bob wanted to see us at 5 in the afternoon one day in our office, sort of felt that perhaps he had decided. Bob walked in, closed the door, and was very matter of fact. So he said, Shepard gets the first flight, Grissom gets the second flight, and Glenn is the backup for both of these 2 suborbital missions. Any questions? Absolute silence. He said, thank you very much, good luck, turned around and left the room. Well, there I am, feeling, of course, totally elated that I'd won the competition, but yet almost immediately afterwards feeling sorry for my buddies, because there they were. I mean, they were trying just as hard as I was.
Christopher Columbus Kraft was the pioneer of early spaceflight operations. He developed the concept under which we'd operate, launched each one of the Mercury missions. For the first generation of young people, it became known as mission controllers.
I don't think that suddenly some morning I woke up and said, oh, we're going to have a mission control center. It wasn't until I began to think about the details that I realized the importance that the ground would play in this operation.
Kraft recognized that flying a spacecraft 5 miles per second really doesn't allow much time for equivocation. And we'd be the guys on the ground who had to come up with the answers if they ran into problems.
Now, the second flight in Project Mercury was a very interesting flight because sitting on the top of a redstone was a chimpanzee named Ham. And he was there because we had to prove, before we could put humans in space, that we indeed would not kill the chimpanzee. We, in operations, considered that to be a very successful flight. We got the chimpanzee back, and he'd done a very good job. But a lot of people didn't see it that way, and particularly the medical community, who had not yet believed that man could do a job in space. And as a result, they said, we want you to test a certain number of chimpanzees at the Johnsville centrifuge to destruction before we'll let you fly Alan Shepard.
Our recommendation strongly was, okay, let's put Shepard in the next one. Everything worked fine. Wernher said no. He said, we want everything absolutely right. So we flew another unmanned mission.
Большинство из нас, отбросив честолюбие, вот мы согласились, когда нас спрашивали, а кто же все-таки должен занять место первого командира корабля «Восток». Некоторые, стесняясь себя предложить, начали там кого-то, но большинство из нас сказали, Юрий Гагарин. Юрий Гагарин. Вот я, Витя Горбатко, там сказал, Юрий Гагарин. А некоторые были против, там один выдвигал Германа Титова.
Это было рабочее время, это было перед обедом или обед, и вдруг нам объявляют срочно всем собраться в красный уголок. Мы быстро все бегом в красный уголок, это у нас было на втором этаже. Все собрались, и вдруг объявляют.
Трудно выделить кого-либо одного. Но такое решение нужно было принять, и командование ВВС рекомендует первым для выполнения космического полета назначить старшего лейтенанта Гагарина Юрия Алексеевича. Запасным пилотом назначить Титова Германа Степановича. Разрешите, товарищи, мне заверить наше советское правительство.
12 апреля 1961 года очень ясный, солнечный, теплый. Ну, так было начало космической пилотируемой эры.
Вот, и поехали одевать скафандры, то меня одевали первым, чтобы Юрий Алексеевич меньше был в костюме, в скафандре. Поэтому в автобусе 2 места было специально оборудовано. Юра на первом сидел, я на втором. И мы приехали на старт. Юра вышел, пошел докладывать председателю государственной комиссии, а я не пошел даже туда. Ну, что идти-то? Я был уверен, что ничего не случится. Что может случиться, если нормальный и здоровый человек утром проснулся в бодром настроении, оделся и сел в кабину? Что с ним может случиться? Ничего. Так вот. Поэтому я даже пока ждал там на старте, по 30-минутной готовности я уехал со старта. Я там поспал немножечко, подремал еще.
Дедов, я один. Послушайте меня. Буду вам транслировать команды. Прием. Минутная готовность. Дедов, я заря один. Внимание. Минутная готовность. Минутная готовность. Заря-1, я Кедр. Вас понял, минутная готовность. Занимал исходное положение. Поэтому несколько задержу с ответом прием. Продувка. 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 Зажигание. Заря-1, я Кедр. Произошло разделение с носителем. Раздор снизу землю. Хорошо разлетела земля. Наблюдаем облака над землей, мелкие кутевые. И тени один, красиво, красота. Как слышите прием? Заря, молодец, отлично все идет, хорошо. Я Заря, прием. Чувство невесомости интересно, все плавает, вся красота.
Говорит Москва. Работают все радиостанции Советского Союза. Передаем сообщение ТАСС о первом в мире полете человека в космическое пространство. 12 апреля 1961 года в Советском Союзе выведен на орбиту вокруг Земли первый в мире космический корабль-спутник «Восток» человеком, пилотом-космонавтом космического корабля «Спутника Восток» является гражданин Союза Советских Социалистических Республик, летчик майор Гагарин Юрий Алексеевич.
В общем, у меня очень тесные связи кровные с Юрием Алексеевичем. Плюс ко всему, когда я на свет появилась, он меня крестил, носил вокруг купели. По своему настрою, по своему подъему эмоциональному, вот наши ветераны сравнивают вот тот день с Днем Победы. Потому что буквально весь народ высыпал на улицу, все обнимались, все целовались, все друг друга поздравляли. Занятия в школе, естественно, прекратились. На заводах, на фабрике стихийные такие вот митинги были буквально.
Отец был в банкетном зале Кремля. Он не стоял на трибуне в зале. И когда Москва встречала Гагарина, то он ехал в какой-то там одной из последних машин. И никто не знал абсолютно о том, что это главный конструктор.
Товарищ первый секретарь Центрального комитета Коммунистической партии Советского Союза, председатель Совета министров СССР, рад доложить вам, что задание Центрального комитета Коммунистической партии и Советского правительства выполнено. Первый в мире космический полет совершен на советском космическом корабле «Восток» 12 апреля 1961 года. Самочувствие отличное. Готов выполнить любое новое задание нашей партии и правительства. Майор Гагарин.
Жена и дочери мои в Москве живут хорошо, здоровы, чувствуют себя прекрасно. Дочери растут, жена работает, так что семья вполне такая хорошая, здоровая, все работают.
Полет Гагарина в космос – это достижение всего человечества Земли. Открылась эра пилотируемой космонавтики. Земля, человек вышел за пределы Земли. Это величайшее событие 20 века.
In 1961, the U.S. space program, which was created to start man's advancement into space, was attempting to launch the first human into space, Alan Shepard. It was a competition with the Russians. The press drove that immensely. There was a great deal of turmoil in the space program, but even more in the U.S. A gentleman named Yuri Gagarin flew in space. And not only did he not do a suborbital flight, he did an orbital flight. So while the Russians indeed scored a coup, the doctors quickly decided that it was okay for us to put Alan Shepard in space in a suborbital flight.
I think I ran
the whole gamut of emotions, really. Getting into the suit, going through the physical and so on, that was all rote, that we'd practiced that so much. The excitement really didn't start to build until the trailer pulled up at the launch pad. I walked out and looked at that huge Redstone rocket for the first time. And I thought, well, now, there is that little rascal, and I'm going to get up on top and fly that thing. And, you know, pilots always go out to the airplanes and kick the tires before they fly. Nobody would let me get near the rocket to kick the fins, but I kind of walked around and thought, well, I'll take a good look at it because I'll never see that part of the machine again. And thought, well, okay, Buster, let's go and get the job done. A lot of times people have said, oh, you really must have been scared. Fortunately, I wasn't scared. Nervous, but not frightened to death. There has to be a belief, a dedication to training to the point where you just absolutely not panic.
All Roger, lift off and the clock has started.
But at that point, you're basically thinking, what do I do if this goes wrong? What do I do if that goes wrong? In some cases, the fact that you're accelerating with the thrust of the rocket, that's good because, you know, the rocket is doing its job and it's doing it correctly.
This is Freedom 7. The fuel is go 4G. 5.5 cabin. Oxygen go. All systems are go.
Just reaching the apex of the trajectory when I was going to be in the middle of the weightlessness.
On the periscope. What a beautiful view.
And I said, well, now I got to get ready for re-entry, so enough of that subjective thinking. All I had to do was survive the re-entry forces.
Mercury spacecraft is beginning to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. 9G coming down.
And you do it in a fairly, like in that flight, a rather short period of time, just 16 minutes, as a matter of fact. In a helicopter flying back to the carrier and seeing thousands of sailors, there they were cheering for me, and that was probably the first emotional moment in that whole flight. We were invited back to Washington after the mission. Jack, of course, was there. There were the heads of NASA there. We talked about the details of the flight, and he's leaning forward, listening intently to this thing. And toward the end of the conversation, he said to the NASA people, what are we doing next? They said, well, there was a couple of guys over in the corner talking about maybe going to the moon. He said, I want a briefing. Just 3 weeks after 15 minutes of space is when Kennedy made his announcement.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
I don't know what you think our response to that was, but frankly, it scared the hell out of me. We didn't know anything about spaceflight at that point in time. We didn't know how to do orbit determination. But suddenly somebody was asking us to do the orbital mechanics associated with going to the moon.
At that time, we were in the depths of the Cold War. The Soviets at that time were taking a lot of students to the Soviet Union, giving them their education. And then sending them back to their countries that were indoctrinated by communists. And it was getting a lot of credibility. And they were saying that they were superior to us in technology and in research. And to prove this, they were saying, look at their missiles. And their missiles had been orbiting while ours too often had been blowing up on the launch pad. And so we looked at this at that time almost as a combat mission, as though you were setting out to prove that was not so.
This was our first manned orbital launch, and at the time we launched John Glenn, 2 of our previous 5 rockets had blown up. So when we committed to put John Glenn on top of the rocket, the odds were 40-60 that this rocket might blow up.
A big difference back in those days was when we would make our program completely open for the rest of the world to share. The rest of the world then participated in those early flights, and they liked what they saw and backed what we were doing.
Godspeed, John Glenn. Roger, the clock is operating. We're underway.
The launch back at that time was about 5.5 minutes from the launch pad into orbit. What you're trying to do is get up to orbital speed, and that was about 17,500 miles per hour, which is almost 5 miles a second. You're peaking up right up to the maximum G's just as you get into orbit, and then you're cut off. And you go from 7.7 G's to 0. And that's a good transition. You're really happy with that.
Roger, 0G, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous.
Roger, 7. You have a go. At least 7 orbits.
Roger, understand go for at least 7 orbits.
You go around the Earth, it takes about an hour and 29 minutes to go around the Earth. So you're doing a day in 45 minutes, a night in 45 minutes.
Roger, Friendship 7. We share Capcom. L.A. Over. Roger, how you doing, Gordo? We're doing real fine up here. Everything is going very well. Over. Very good, John. You sound good. Roger. That was sure a short day. Just to my right, I can see a big pattern of lights. Apparently right on the coast. The lights show up very well. Thank everybody for turning them on.
Near the end of the flight, 2 ground stations received signals from the spacecraft that the heat shield was loose. And so once the retro pack, which sat in the middle of the heat shield, once it was fired and thrown away, the heat shield would be free to move around and the whole thing would probably all burn up on re-entry. We let the retro pack burn off then during re-entry.
2, 1, fire. Roger. Retros are firing.
Made for a very interesting re-entry from where I was, because you could see these burning chunks going back by the window, and couldn't be absolutely certain whether they were the heat shield or the retro pack.
This is Friendship 7, a real fireball outside. Main chute is on green. Chute is out in race condition.
When you see that parachute deploy, that's the prettiest thing you ever saw.
Beautiful chute.
When Glenn finished his mission, Glenn, Grissom, and I flew with Jack back to Washington for Glenn's ceremony, and we talked about what Gus had done. We talked about what John had done. We talked about what I had done, all the way back. I tell you, he was really, really a space cadet.
No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal is one we intend to win. We have seen facilities now being created for the greatest and most complex exploration in man's history. We have felt the ground shake and the air shattered by the testing of a Saturn C-1 booster rocket, many times as powerful as the Atlas which launched John Glenn.
After his assassination, it moved from being a challenge to literally a crusade. This was now our mission to win this battle for President Kennedy. It was visceral, it was gut. We are going to do it, and we're the right people to do it, and we're going to do it in the time frame he said we'll do it.
We recognized that we probably had to do a lot of learning. And that's when we conceived the Gemini spacecraft. It was actually a two-man version of the Mercury spacecraft. It would allow us to do rendezvous and docking in space for the first time. It would help us to find out if man could survive for 14 days at zero gravity. It would help us to do EVA. And all of these new requirements were operations that eventually we would have to do around the moon.
Of course, I was delighted when I was assigned command of the first Gemini flight, and it was shortly after that that I developed a disorientation problem in my ear, and NASA grounded me, and I was grounded for almost 6 years. And the NASA guy said, "Well, we like you, Shepard. You can be in charge of all the astronauts. You can't fly, obviously, but... And this was not a fault of the system, but obviously being grounded was the worst thing that has ever happened to me.
Дело в том, что в это время уже было опубликовано, что американцы начали программу, будущую лунную программу, начали работать над кораблем Gemini, где должно было быть 2 члена экипажа. И, конечно, вот это детское соревнование, кто первый там, первый спутник запустит, кто первый там полет, кто первый спустит с орбиты корабль там, и так далее. И, возможно, именно вот эти соображения подтолкнули его к тому, что один раз он к нам обратился с этим предложением посмотреть, нельзя ли сделать такую модернизацию, переконструировать Восток так, чтобы можно было на этом корабле совершить полет 2 или 3 человек. Мы сходу ответили очень отрицательно, поскольку система спасения очень ненадежная, а ракеты в то время еще были тоже очень ненадежные. Прошло некоторое время, и вот постоянное трение начальством, они пришли ко мне, начали говорить, что пора безобразие кончать, надо вступать в партию. Нам хода не дадут, нам не дадут работать. Слушай, давайте вам пора вступать, это же безобразие, что такое неравноправие. Королев засмеялся и сказал, ничего с ним не выйдет, никакими силами вы ее туда не затянете. Это говорило о том, что они все примерно так же думали, все так же внутри себя плевались всю жизнь. И начиная от мелких функционеров, инженеров, технического и политического начальства, все они дело ненавидели, но в то же время понимали, что это вопрос безопасности. Очень тесно, очень тесно. 3 человека, конечно, в таком объеме это очень плохо. Каждая теснота – это не только неудобство, а это, в общем-то, и опасность. И я считаю, с этой точки зрения, что надо, конечно, корабль свободу, безопасность.
Мы сказали Сергею Павловичу, ведь рано или поздно нам придется выходить в космос, работать. Но мы все-таки доказали ему, потому что мы тренировались на кратковременной невесомость на самолете Ту-104. Тогда мы делали 30 секунд.
18 марта 1965 года в 9 часов был старт корабля «Восход-2». И сразу после выведения на орбиту я стал готовиться к переходу в шлюзовую камеру. Это ощущение, которое испытывает человек при попадании в какую-то другую среду. Что такое? Тут нет. Увидел красивую девушку, какое чувство возникло к ней. Да? Хороший пейзаж тоже, чувство радости, вдохновение. Вот сейчас я возьму и напишу этот пейзаж. И вдруг ты видишь, что Земля-то круглая, и что вот эта атмосфера, которой мы дышим, она такая тоненькая. Атмосфера 12 километров фактически кислорода, пленочка, а остальное все уже идет туда без кислорода. И вот эти 12 километров, они дают цвет Земли голубой. И еще меня больше всего поразила необыкновенная тишина. А у меня перчатки, пальцы вышли из перчаток, и ноги вышли из сапог. Я внутри плавал скафандр. Я выглядел, наверное, со стороны, как вот этот рекламный белый резиновый человек, который фирмы Мишлен, что ли, вот такой. Как вот не страшно было на земле, страшно было. Ситуация была сложная, и лучше меня ее никто не понимал. Поэтому я, не спрашивая землю, я сам перешел на давление 0,27. Таким образом, скафандр практически вернулся к своей форме. Они говорят, что ты задерживаешься.
Вот, да, тут есть небольшие проблемки. Какие проблемки? Я говорю, да, все уже нормально, я их прошел. Вот эти проблемки, они долго очень их волновали. А здесь я увидел то, что никогда обычные люди не могут видеть. Это невозможно физически. То есть увидеть сразу яркое солнце, голубая земля и черное небо. Это невозможно. Сколько угодно об этом можно думать. Мне пришлось решить совершенно новую задачку. В отличие от тех, кто уже передо мной, 6 человек летало в космос, но они не выходили в открытый космос.
We put 6 Americans in space in our first 2 years, and there were close calls on every one of those missions, but we got every one of our crewmen home. By the time that we had finished with Project Mercury, we had learned that man could live and could perform in space. So we moved into the Gemini program, and Gemini was designed to develop and test and prove the technologies we needed in order to go to the moon.
While I was head of the astronaut office, it was my responsibility, care and feeding of a very enthusiastic, very intelligent, very dedicated, motivated bunch of guys. In charge of their training, helping Deke with crew assignments, that sort of thing. Of course, Deke and I were both mad because we were grounded. We'd both been training as astronauts, and we just wouldn't let those guys get away with anything. I mean, we knew what they had to do. We knew how they had to do it. Maybe I was a little more forceful than I would have been normally.
I was very fortunate to be in that second group of 9 astronauts. Our job was to fly the Gemini program and the Apollo. Well, first, I was chosen to be on the first Gemini crew without Shepard. The Shepard got grounded, and so Grissom was there, and the commander could choose who he wanted to, and so he chose John Young. So Gemini 3 went in March the 23rd, 1965, and Gus Grissom. John Young did 3 orbits around the Earth. The Gemini was in good shape.
Felt very good. We'd worked very hard to get started in the Gemini program, and it was a real honor to be picked to go on a first flight. Not only did I feel very good, I felt lucky as a Dickens.
Originally, I was to do the first spacewalk. It was going to be simple. I just open the hatch, stand up with kind of a double-length hose, turn around a little bit, and get back down. But after Leonov did that, NASA had to respond. So what did we do? For Gemini 4, real fast, worked up a simple blow-down package with an umbilical for an environmental control system, and then White went out.
Gemini 4, Hawaii, Capcom. So we just had word from Houston. We're ready to have you get out whenever you're ready. Okay, we got our go now, is that right? Affirmative.
Okay, I'm out.
The United States had never conducted a spacewalk before. I remember Ed White just floating free in space against this intense blue background of the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay, under my own influence. I feel like $1 million.
And he is absolutely just seemed to be utterly joyous, ebullient. And you thought about, here is this guy out in space, and he is moving 5 miles a second. He's totally free from a spacecraft, only held by the small oxygen umbilical. And he is his own little spacecraft in a spacesuit. It was something that just, you know, you did these things for the first time, and you were absolutely amazed that A, it worked, and B, this giant step forward that you took.
The view from up there is something that's just spectacular. The one that I remember the most is as we came over Florida, I looked down, I could see the lower state of Florida and the complete chain of islands all the way down in one look. It was actually my last look because that was about the time that I got the word from the flight director to start in.
When we first started off in space, the Soviet Union had about a 2.5-year lead on us. But when Ed White stepped outside the spacecraft, on the Gemini 4 mission, we had narrowed that lead down to mere months. And then on the next 2 missions, for the first time, we set American manned spaceflight records. First for mission duration, and then we rendezvoused 2 spacecrafts.
Gemini 6 initially was GTA, Gemini Titan Agena.
Our first attempt to launch, we lost the Agena. It didn't make it into orbit.
First chamber blew up and blew the Agena across the Atlantic Ocean. So here's Wally and I in October of '65 with no target vehicle.
Amazingly, John Yardley and Walter Burke conceived of the idea of Gemini 6 taking off after Gemini 7 and using it as a target for rendezvous. I said, wow, can we do that?
The Gemini 7 flight was a 2-week mission with Frank Borman because the doctors thought that humans couldn't stay in zero gravity for 2 weeks because we had evolved under the Earth's influence of gravity, and so isn't there something in the body that is related to gravity that keeps us alive?
14 days in a Gemini spacecraft is a very, very trying experience.
Being 14 days with Frank Borman any place was wild, so there was a song that was sung by Nat King Cole.
We sang it for 14 days. It's Put Your Sweet Lips a Little Closer to the Phone, Nat King Cole.
Put your sweet lips a little closer to the phone.
Put your sweet
Let's
lips a little closer to the phone. Let's pretend that we're together all along.
I was down there to watch Gemini 7 launch. It got into orbit good, and right away I saw 2 long tractor trailers bringing out the 2 stages of Gemini 6 again to the launch pad. So we got ready to go. And
5.
We're on the launch pad, go through the countdown.
2, 1.
0. Clock started, liftoff. The engine started and whoop, and shut down. Negative liftoff. A plug fell out. As it was the 3rd time we got off, did our rendezvous.
It worked out like a piece of cake. We rendezvoused right on schedule, coming in about 30 feet per second. And we came in and stopped about 10 feet from Gemini 7.
Gemini 7 and 6, would you continue with the description of your station keeping?
Right now, 6 is about 10 feet above and to the left of 7. We're just flying nose to nose, approximately 15 feet apart.
The first rendezvous, Gemini 6 with Gemini 7, I think was a magnificent milestone in the quest to go to the moon, because we had to determine the types of rendezvous that we want to do around the moon, and we first had it just about around the Earth.
I remember when we were back on Earth, I looked at Lovell, and Lovell looked at me, and we said, well, I said, you going to pass out? And he said, no, and we were fine.
Yeah, well, we held hands and said we want to tell the world that we're engaged.
The launch of 2 successful on-time vehicles was very reassuring to us. Our flight plan depended very much on the launch of both vehicles occurring precisely on time. The launch itself has to be described as perhaps one of the greatest thrills that can ever be encountered by a pilot. We separated from the second stage, and the Gemini launch vehicle put us in a very precise orbit.
Neil performed the burn, and we were injected into what we consider our transfer trajectory. And we proceeded in on the relative trajectory to the Agena until about 1.7 miles, at which time Neil began the manual visual braking phase. This particular maneuver is almost exactly like the one we'll use in lunar orbit.
Flight, we are done. And he's really a smoothie.
We had about a 2-hour period of Agena operations we were going to perform, and we turned the lights up in the cockpit, got out the books, and started getting squared away for the next series of Agena maneuvers.
I didn't actually notice when it started to deviate from the planned attitude. Dave first noticed it, and when the rates became quite violent, I concluded that we just couldn't continue. I was afraid we might lose consciousness because our spin rate had gotten pretty high, and I wanted to make sure that we got away before that happened.
He says he is separated from the Agena, and he's in a roll, and he can't stop it.
Of course, once we got away and turned our thrusters back on and couldn't regain control, we recognized that it was a failure in our craft, not the Agena. Have to call it quits. Come home. That was a great disappointment to us to have to cut that flight short.
We did Gemini so fast, and we flew 10 missions in 18 months. It was a go, go, go.
That's go fever. It's
other inputs that make you want to do things beyond the good logic you have. We suffered Go fever many times because of that commitment to Mr. Kennedy.
During my first space flight, Gemini 12, I was circling the globe every 90 minutes outside the spacecraft, floating above the Earth and looking down. After 5 days in orbit, Jim Lovell and I returned to Earth, having accomplished the final mission in the Gemini program. And it was November 1966, and we had only 3 years left to accomplish Kennedy's goal to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Gemini prepared us for Apollo, but we still had a lot of work to do.
While many of us in the operations world and some engineers were still working on Gemini, the Apollo program came into being. And many of these people had never had any experience in space flight. They came from all kinds of other engineering walks of life. But they had been given the task to very quickly come up to speed and start building a spacecraft. They were running like the devil, trying to get it done. They didn't have time to listen to lessons learned. And frankly, they built a damn lousy spacecraft.
We were in the consoles in Mission Control Friday afternoon, January 27th, 1967. 1 month from launch, testing the Apollo Command and Service Module. Crew members were Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. We had worked with Gus and Ed in the Mercury and the Gemini program, and Roger was a Navy rookie preparing for his first space flight.
But I think I could be around to fly for quite a few more years yet, and as to how far I want to go as far as I'd like to go on a moon flight, and if we go to Mars, I'd like to go on that.
There's a great deal of pride involved in making a first flight, so I think I'm looking forward to the flight with a great deal of anticipation.
Oh, I doubt if I have any philosophy towards the danger. I recognize that there is some risk. There are unknowns and things can happen that we haven't planned for. But I try to take care of this by leaving an open mind and at least try to make sure that they don't do anything impulsively. If we get a noise or something happens, I take time to see what we're doing and make sure that every time they move a switch or push a button, that they look and they have the right one.
And the test that day hadn't been going well. We were 1 month from launch, and we were pressing to meet President Kennedy's deadline of getting to the moon by the end of the decade. And we started to press too hard. During the day, we had problems in communications.
Hey, how are we going to get to the moon? We can't talk between 3 buildings.
We had problems in life support. Our test procedures were faulty.
I can't hear a thing you're saying. Jesus Christ.
We'd call a hold to the test, we'd write out the new test sequence, and then we'd continue on. And at 5:31 that afternoon, the controllers were startled by cries coming from the spacecraft, and for 12 seconds, we sat there and listened. It was all over in about 12 seconds. And with their death came anger. Anger at ourselves because we knew we were responsible for America's first space disaster.
It was a terrible day. And we had a NASA committee that looked at what was wrong, and everything was wrong. It was poor workmanship, poor wiring, etc. And so one of the first meetings we had with George Lowe as the new program manager was a meeting to decide what we needed to do. And we listed 125 things that had to be done to make that spacecraft viable. It took a lot of guts, frankly. We had to rebuild the industry, had to rebuild ourselves, and we had to rebuild the spacecraft.
И никто не знал абсолютно о том, что это главный конструктор. А тогда это была такая полоса секретности, что даже Нобелевскую премию ведь отец не получил 2 раза. Ведь комитет по Нобелевским премиям обратился к нашему правительству с предложением дать Нобелевскую премию за «Спутник» сначала, а потом за Гагарина. И Хрущев ответил, что у нас творцом новой техники является весь народ.
Пока были вместе работали, мы немножко недооценивали его. И когда он умер, мы, конечно, постепенно поняли, что мы потеряли очень много.
Перед этим без человека послали корабль в космос, горячее дно корабля, и в корабле, вот в тонной части, увеличили теплозащитный слой. И парашют увеличили, площадь парашюта увеличили. Туда забивали деревянными молотками. Парашют все же забили, закрутили, все, вроде корабль готов. Контрольный пусть не делали больше, сразу комаров послали.
Народом нашей Родины, прокладывающей человечеству путь к коммунизму. Летчик, космонавт, комаров.
Я его последний раз слышал, когда он доложил о том, что пошел к Земле. Спокойный, уравновешенный голос. О том, что он рано летит, я не думаю, что у него. Это он почувствовал там, на орбите, когда пошли неполадки.
Закрутился и не наполнился. Естественно, введение запасной парашютной системы не сработало, не помогло делу. И он со скоростью где-то порядка 80 метров в секунду, там 70-80 метров в секунду он коснулся земли. Это совершенно гигантская скорость для посадки аппарата. Он был, так сказать, разбит совершенно. То есть он не разлетелся на куски, но, что называется, сплющился.
Мы в управлении полетами были. И в действительности, и сам Юрий тоже плакал. Слезы у нас текли. Как же это так получилось? Мы очень переживали.
Поэтому, когда прилетел вертолет к месту падения, увидел всю эту картину, то летчики растерялись. Сначала передали, что космонавт чувствует себя не очень. Никак не могли понять, что же на самом деле.
Володю мы встречали. Ну, то, что от него осталось. Нам не хотели показывать, но тогдашний главнокомандующий военно-воздушными силами сказал: нет, показать, чтобы они, говорят, видели, что и такое может быть. Не только розы, а и шипы могут быть, и кровь. Это мы прекрасно понимали о том, что природа никогда же ведь просто так свои тайны не открывает. Она всегда требует жертв.
В это время мы вместе, и Быковский, и с парашютом. Мы выполнили первый прыжок, а облачность опускалась, и решался вопрос, делать ли второй полет или нет. И вот в этот момент вот я не слышал, но Леонов слышал, Попович слышал.
И после этого примерно минут через 50 мы так и не взлетали. Потом пришло сообщение, сказали, что вот Гагарин вместе с Серегиным улетели на самолете. Значит, время вышло, а они не вернулись.
И когда только вечером привезли, объявили место, где произошла авария, катастрофа точнее, и оттуда привезли остатки тела и его, и Серегина, вот здесь дрожь и страшная боль какая-то такая, ну не сердечная, а общая боль, что да, его не стало. И долго еще вот не верилось, что его нет. Хотя я видел сам остатки его тела, которые складывали по частям.
Конечно, отношение несколько изменилось, это понятное дело. Ведь сейчас можно даже на улицах наших городов встретить, спросить, кто такой Гагарин, и вам ответят, это, наверное, футболист.
The saga of Apollo program should begin with a fire in January of
1967 that killed 3 astronauts, threw the whole program into disarray. And out of that terrible tragedy, I'm convinced came the genesis of Apollo program that was so successful. One of the beauties of working for NASA at this time was it wasn't bureaucratic. When I first flew the simulator, I pulled the stick back and the nose went down. Pushed the stick forward and the nose went up. I called the North American engineer over and I said, hey, you got the polarity screwed up on this. This is, look, what's happening? He said, oh, that's the way we're going to fly it. I said, what do you mean? I never flown an airplane like this. He said, oh, you're not going to fly the airplane, you're going to fly the target. And so I said, huh? So I didn't argue with him. I just went over and called NASA in Houston. I said, look, these idiots have got it all screwed up. And a half an hour later, it was changed. They didn't have a committee, it just was changed. It was wonderful. We were assigned to the third Apollo mission. Was supposed to have been a long duration exercising the lunar module and command module in Earth orbit out to 8,000 miles. And then while we were going through the systems with the spacecraft, I got a call from Deke Slayton, who said we've had a change in plans, and he informed me that the CIA had informed NASA that they probably be a Soviet attempt to go around the moon before the end of the year, and they wanted to know if we could change our mission, train, and be able to go. I immediately said yes, because I knew that Bill and Jim were dying for the chance to do this. The whole concept of changing our mission was done because we were in that program, the Can-Do program, beat the Soviets to the moon.
So they made some very bold decisions here at NASA. They said if Apollo 7 is successful in its 11-day orbit, then we will change the mission of Apollo 8 and send it to the moon. Young President Kennedy made a commitment for this nation to send man to the moon and back within this decade. The nation was committed, but the engineers and the technicians that gave so much extra time. Wernher's making a presentation about some of the work that's being done by his team on the Saturn V. And he said, well, now, we have this idea here where we can improve this. Fritz, you tell him it was your idea. Wernher would always make it a team effort, not just Wernher thought of it. Now that is a real leader. And when we went through countdown on Apollo 7, I said, I can't believe this is working so perfectly. Boom, we lifted off. We didn't delay our Saturn 1B because of the booster. We delayed because we made a mistake on the spacecraft.
We felt like the spacecraft that we were going to fly was such a difference from what had essentially killed Gus and Roger and Ed.
That was the spur that allowed us to make that final decision after Apollo 7 to say, yes, let's go.
To put people on the moon with enough fuel to enable them to return safely home to Earth requires a still larger and more powerful rocket, however. And this is what we call the Saturn V. The Saturn V will have a thrust of 7.5 million pounds in the first stage, and the takeoff weight of this monstrous rocket will be about 6 million pounds, or 3,000 tons, which is about the weight of a light naval cruiser.
Apollo was really not a program to explore the moon. It was to beat the Soviets, to demonstrate our technological preeminence, another battle in the Cold War.
1968 was a very poor year in this country.
The Vietnam War was going on. All the young people knew the war was a mistake. There were 2 assassinations. There were riots in the streets. The Democratic Convention had riots there. Yet at the last part of December, we launched something everybody in this country could be proud of. 3 men going 240,000 miles all the way to the moon.
You know, sometimes you get into a project that you really never quite see the end. You're working hard, you forget about the final part, the completion. And then it was the day of the launch.
We have ignition
and you know, it suddenly dawned on me that this was not another Earth orbital flight. This spacecraft and this rocket are going to take off, and we're headed for the moon.
We have liftoff. I literally felt like I was being thrashed around like a rat in the jaws of a terrier. Of course, I was the rookie of the flight. I like to say that everybody was a rookie on the first Saturn V.
We see an S-1C, the first stage cut off.
Well, we made it into orbit. We went around the Earth once and a half, but over Hawaii, Mike Collins said, Apollo 8, you're go for translunar injection. We lit the S-4B, picked up 25,000 miles an hour, and started toward the moon.
This flight couldn't have been scripted by a screenwriter any better than it actually came out to be. It was on December 21st. We had orbited the moon on Christmas Eve.
I told Michael you guys are up there, and he said, who's driving? I think Isaac Newton's doing most of the driving right now.
One of the important things on the flight plan was when we would lose communication with the Earth, because as you go around the moon, the communications would be blanked out.
Safe journey, guys. Thanks a lot, Trips. We'll see you on the other side.
We went into the shadow of the moon, and it was dark. I got to tell you, the hair went up on the back of my neck. When we popped out of that shadow and relit our engines, we were going to orbit.
Bill Anders will always mention that he was the first one to get to the moon because he was in a position whereby he was a few centimeters ahead of us.
You know, I mean, first is first.
When
First
we
around the
finally
moon.
came into the sunshine, I think we were best expressed as three school kids looking through a candy store window. Our noses were pressed to the glass. We were just 60 miles above the moon at that time.
Well, we were on the third revolution, and I was busy taking pictures of the backside of the moon. And I think Frank yelled out, look, and here was this gorgeous thing coming up over the lunar horizon.
I could put my thumb up and completely hide the Earth. Everything I knew was behind my thumb. In fact, it didn't look like there was anybody there, it looked completely inhabited. But I did know that there was 5 billion astronauts all on this spaceship Earth.
We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that ever listened to a human voice. And the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate.
For all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on this good earth.
One of the more exciting parts of the mission from my standpoint was lighting the rocket to get us home. Otherwise, we'd still be there.
And we had a signal that got down to 5 seconds before it should be lit. And it said something like, do you really want to make this maneuver? And so I hesitated with my finger, and Borman says, push the button, push the button.
We lit the rocket for about 4 or 5 minutes. We started home.
Coming back from the moon is different than the Earth orbital types because you're coming in faster than a circular speed from the moon. And when you get right down to the atmosphere, that's when you're doing your max speed.
We're coming back 35,000 feet a second, way over any world speed record that had been set before.
As soon as we got down, I knew that we accomplished a successful first flight to the moon, but I didn't know the significance of it. It takes a little bit of history and aging to say, hey, really what happened?
As we stepped out on the carrier with that fresh ocean breeze, it was a feeling to me of overwhelming sense of gratitude for what we have been part of. I think that the three of us were very, very fortunate Americans. 400,000 people put that thing together.
We suddenly ended that year on a positive note, doing something that everybody could take pride in.
In the meanwhile, the Soviet Union was still planning the free return trajectory around the moon, and after they were going to build a big booster like we had. But before that, our intelligence knew that and launch in the first stage with a Soyuz, but without that round orbital ball. So we'd have 2 people in there for 5 or 6 days. And that was how, so I could say the Soviets had been to the moon. And then we were going to have the big booster, the N1, which weighed more than the Saturn V. And my good friend Alexei Leonov, he was the one that had been chosen to go on that. He was there to watch those N1s blow up time after time. The first one got about 12,000 feet. One of the pipes broke and caught fire. The second one got up to about 300 to 500 feet above the battery. And one of the oxidizer boats, there was 30 engines, swallowed the boat and eventually exploded. And it fell down. That was the biggest non-nuclear man-made explosion in the history of mankind.
2 months later, Apollo 9 launched with 2 spacecraft, the normal Apollo Command Module and the new lunar module they named Spider. It was the first checkout of that ungainly machine in Earth orbit.
So the LEM is really the taxi that provides the transportation between the orbiting command module and the lunar surface.
The lunar module flew again in Apollo 10, this time to the moon, in a full dress rehearsal of a landing attempt.
And so I flew the first lunar module out there with Gene Cernan as my lunar module pilot, John Young as my command module pilot. But our job, Cernan and I, was to go down about 10 miles above the moon and try to pick out potential landing sites on the moon for the next mission that might make it.
I felt like I had to pick up my feet to keep from dragging my heels on the top of those mountains. When you move that fast across the surface and you're that close, it's an overpowering experience. At one time, actually, Apollo 10 was in line to be the first landing. And Tom Stafford could have been the first man on the moon. And that would have been perfectly fine, and I would have been the second, and that would have been perfectly fine.
But the feeling was that we just didn't know enough to do that. So we took the next thing, and I was happy to be on the next mission. Just never would have occurred to me to want it to have been any place else than where I was on Apollo 10.
There was no person really selected to be the first one on the moon. I had 10, Neil had 11, Conrad had 12. We said, somebody will land.
I think that we felt that the missions 9 and 10 adequately demonstrated the lunar module's capabilities, that we really, deep down inside, felt that we could make it. We could have very good possibility of making it on the first try.
I was asked by the bosses, do you think you and your guys are ready? And I have to say, well, you know, it'd be nice to have another month, but we were in a race here, and we had to take the opportunity we had it, and I had to say, we're ready. We are ready to go.
We were there at the right time. Neil Armstrong born in 1930, Buzz Aldrin 1930, Mike Collins 1930. You don't call that lucky? I loved them both, but what I would almost call freakish circumstances kept us from being as close as some of the crews. Neil and Buzz would be off in Bethpage, Long Island, worrying about Grumman putting the LEM together. I'd be in Downey, California, worrying about the command module. Due to a whole set of circumstances, we didn't have that bonding experience. We all came together about 6 months before the flight. You know, there was some small fuss, if I remember correctly, before the flight about who went first, but it seemed to me that Neil Armstrong should have gone first because of his experience out at Edwards as a test pilot for NASA. He was almost in a class by himself, and that was what we considered the single most important yardstick, if you will. And also, I thought from a personality point, he was a superb choice.
Our launch day finally arrived. We took the elevator up the gantry where the 360-foot tall Saturn V rocket stood magnificently as the countdown progressed. Due to the seating order, I was the last to enter the spacecraft. So I stood 2 flights down, alone on the gantry, and I could see the sunrise over the waves of Cocoa Beach.
Dawn at the Cape on the 16th of July, 1969. In the minds of many was the emerging concept of a new era for mankind on planet Earth. The curtain was going up on what was truly the greatest show on Earth before the largest single audience ever assembled.
12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear. Roger, roll.
So then we fired the third stage engine, and it accelerated us to 25,000 miles an hour on the trajectory bound for the moon.
Going to the moon, I always liken it to a long, complex daisy chain, a lot of links, fragile. You break one link, the rest of them don't matter a lot.
On the 8-day round-trip journey, the three of us lived in the space capsule.
I thought we had a 90% chance of getting back safely to Earth on that flight, but only a 50-50 chance of making a successful landing on the first attempt. There's so many unknowns in that descending from lunar orbit down to the surface that had not been demonstrated yet by testing, and there was a big chance that we didn't understand something in there properly, and we had to abort and come back to Earth without landing.
On day 3, we fired the engine to slow us down, and the moon's gravity captured us into orbit. Neil and I entered the lunar craft, named Eagle, and separated from the command module, Columbia, where Mike Collins remained.
Roger, Eagle, done dock. Roger, how does it look? The Eagle has wings.
And so we piloted our spacecraft, Eagle, to the Sea of Tranquility, the most complicated and critical aspect of the entire mission, landing.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro. Go. Righto. Go. Guys, go. Control. Go. Roger, copy. Surgeon. Go. Eagle, Houston, you're go for landing.
In the middle of the descent, our computer did complain at us that it was having a problem. We asked mission control. It was an overload problem in the computer, but the central part of the computer that was doing our calculations of our position and our navigation was working properly, and that was good news. So we continued on toward the landing site, but then the computer showed us where it intended to land, and it was on the side of a large crater with very steep slopes covered with very large boulders. Not a good place to land at all. So I took over manually and flew it like a helicopter, got into a smoother area with not so many rocks, found a level area, and was able to get it down there safely before we ran out of fuel.
4 forward, just into the right level. Stop right. Okay, engine stop.
When we actually shut the engines down on the moon's surface, we had only 17 seconds of fuel remaining. We were that close.
But you could not imagine anything more desolate than what we saw in front of us. Not a sign of life anywhere, nothing growing, just rolling little craters. There was no atmosphere, total blackness beyond the sunlit terrain. Probably hadn't changed in 100,000 years, and yet that's where we were.
To us, the important thing was getting that machine on the ground safely. Getting down on the surface didn't seem like much of a big deal to us.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. I'm going to step off the LEM now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. There you go. Okay, now I think I'll do the same. Beautiful view. Isn't that something? Magnificent sight out here. Magnificent desolation.
You know, my job was get the flag there. I was less concerned about whether that was the right artifact to place. I'd let other wiser minds than mine make those kind of decisions, and I had no problem with it.
That salute was the proudest moment in my life as a military person.
We recognized that we wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for our competitors in the Soviet Union. It was actually the competition that made both of our programs able to do the things that they achieved. And so we recognized that by putting some medallions for our fallen comrades on both sides who had not lived to see the event. That was a tender moment. But it was only instantaneous because there was work to do.
We spent a total of 2.5 hours out on the surface collecting rocks, setting up experiments, taking a few pictures.
For thousands of years, the moon has made her impression upon men and planet Earth. Now man, from planet Earth, has made his impression on the moon. How must those men feel? What must they think as they reflect upon what we have called so technically, so unemotionally, their extravehicular activity? Perhaps we may never know exactly how they felt as they leaped about on the desolate magnificence of the lunar landscape. But remember what we can do if we can just imagine.
Roger, our guidance recommendation is pings, and you're cleared for takeoff. Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. 36 feet per second up. 5, perfect over.
When he talked about Americans around the world where foreigners were coming up to them in different capitals and saying, "We did it," and congratulating Americans, but it was we did it. And they were talking about themselves along with us, the way they viewed this whole thing. I think for the first time, maybe, we had the people of the whole world with a sense of But this was a step that nobody had ever done before, and it was something that meant a lot to people all over the world.
Our Earth is a bit over 4 billion years old, and in the first 4 billion, in cosmic terms, not much happened. Then, in 1968, we left. Apollo 8 left. It exceeded escape velocity, and gravity could no longer keep us pinned down here on the surface. The next year, Apollo 11 not only left, but arrived. Neither went very far or did very much, but as Ben Franklin once asked, what use is a newborn baby? I think Apollo was a dividing line, putting Earth, for better or for worse, into a new category, into the big leagues of planets. To me, that is what is the most significant thing about Apollo.
Apollo 11 Houston, you're still looking mighty fine here. You're cleared for landing. Yeah, we appreciate that, Roger. Roger, here's down the line.
The sense of fulfillment, not only personal satisfaction, basically satisfaction that as a nation we had demonstrated that what we can dream, if we will give our best, we can do. We can live up to the proof.
It was a great personal honor to walk on the moon, but as Neil once observed, there are still places to go beyond belief. From the Wright brothers in Kitty Hawk to Tranquility Base was 66 years. From Tranquility Base, 66 years in the future, takes us to 2035. I believe we deserve to do a little bit more than footprints on the moon. Apollo 11 is a symbol of what a great nation and a great people can do if we work hard, work together, and have strong leaders with vision, realizing the dream of exploration by way of determination.
Can you believe it? Can you realize that that you and I, that all of us, have actually begun the exploration of another world? We have taken the first historic step into our solar system. And with your continued support, I will see you back in orbit with that new space station, to which we will all ride on a reusable launch vehicle, and maybe one day we'll have a man on Mars. Thank you.
The space race faded away. It was the ultimate peaceful competition, USA versus USSR. I'll not assert that it was a diversion which prevented a war. Nonetheless, it was a diversion. It was intense, and it did allow both sides to take the high road with the objectives of science and learning and exploration. Russians announced they had no interest in the moon. They were focusing on an Earth-orbiting manned laboratory. In October, Soyuz 6, 7, and 8, with 7 cosmonauts aboard, flew simultaneously, and in November, Apollo 12 made the second successful landing on the moon.
And that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me.
By the time we got to Apollo 13, this was our 3rd lunar landing mission. The 2 prior missions had been pretty sporty. We were hoping for a change. This mission would go a lot smoother for us.
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here. Can say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
There had been an explosion on board the spacecraft with a lot of collateral damage.
It was a classic case of crisis management. Good leadership throughout the organization fostered teamwork. And then there was initiative, thinking outside the box, perseverance. All these attributes turned an almost complete catastrophe into a successful recovery.
I finally found a gent who corrected my ear problem surgically, and after NASA looked at me for perhaps a year, decided that I was well enough to fly again. I was able to work out a deal where I could fly on the lunar mission. It was stretched out, instead of being 16 minutes, Freedom 7, it was stretched out to 10 days in Apollo 14, and there were obviously, during the translunar and the trans-Earth phases, almost 3 days, when you really could relax. There were obviously tasks of navigation and unstowing and getting ready and so on that had to occur, but really relaxed, right pleasant moments.
And believe me, it's a lot harder to land a jet on an aircraft carrier than it is to land a LEM on a moon. And that's a piece of cake, that moon deal. Of course, the first feeling was one of accomplishment, I guess, if you will. Sense of realizing that, hey, not too long ago, I was grounded. Now I'm on the moon. But then that went away because we had a lot of work to do. After Ed had followed me down and we had set out some of our equipment, taken emergency samples, we had a few moments to look around, to look up in the black sky, a totally black sky, and seeing another planet, planet Earth.
You think it's pretty big when you're back there among your friends and it's 25,000 miles around and so on. But from that distance, you realize it is, in fact, fragile. It is, in fact, a small part only of our solar system, much less the rest of the universe. And I think all of us have expressed that. But to me, and I think to all of us, it was a realization that it is finite, it is small, it is fragile, and we need to start thinking about how to take care of it. At the end of the mission, I played with a little golf club, whacked a couple of golf balls up there.
Miles and miles and miles.
All of us wanted to try to think of something which would interest perhaps young people primarily in the difference in the gravity. The gravity is only 1/6. The lack of atmosphere. There's absolutely a total vacuum up there.
Well, in my left hand I have a feather, in my right hand a hammer, and I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that? How about that? Proves that Mr. Galileo was correct in his findings.
Of the 6 landings on the moon, the last 3, I think, were devoted completely to the science of it.
People like living and working on the moon because in 1/6 gravity, that pressure suit and I weighed 360 pounds, and you could jump straight up 1.5 meters off the ground. We had this rover that we developed.
The rover itself weighed over 1,200 pounds with a crew in there, but on the moon that's only 200 pounds. So the maximum speed of the rover was about 10 kilometers an hour. The thing that really saved us was that there was nobody coming from the other direction. You knew when you were up there, you're all by yourself, and it was exciting.
When we go back to the moon, people are going to really like to live and work up there because the environment is so enjoyable.
I was strolling on the moon one day in a merry, merry month of December. May, when much to my surprise, a pair of bunny eyes.
You have to pinch yourself when you're on the moon. Am I really here at this point in time in space? And the answer is yes, but it's almost like you're in the middle of some science fiction plot. When I left the moon and made those final steps, look back down at my last footstep on the moon, and I'm not coming this way again. I couldn't stop the clock and look back at the Earth and came to the conclusion, you know, I don't know what it all means yet, but I've been lucky. I am not the last man to have walked on the moon. Maybe the last man of Apollo, maybe the last man of the 20th century, but not the last person.
Our nation abandoned the moon in December 1972. Gene Cernan was the last human ever to walk on its surface. And for us, this was a marvelous time to live because we believed in this dream that we were given by John F. Kennedy. And we considered ourselves privileged and proud to be part of the brotherhood that formed in the early years of spaceflight. And we thanked our country every day that they gave us a chance to participate in this great adventure.
Of course, Apollo went on to take us to the moon, but it also left us with a tremendous technology to look towards the future. And as far as Skylab is concerned, it represents a definite turning point. We attempted to take a look at man as he reacted under long-term weightlessness. Whether or not we can extrapolate that 84 days out to several hundred days, incidentally, it takes something like 400 days for a typical Mars mission,
We don't know right now. But it does indicate that we're on the right way to, in assuming that man can exist for long times at zero G.
We're right on the threshold of really a brand new opportunity to explore the solar system and the universe and to increase the value of benefits back here on home.
The fact of the matter is, if man stops really stretching himself and extending himself and looking out, then I think that's when civilization will begin to decline. Man just has that inquisitive nature, and it's got to be satisfied.
In the meanwhile, the Soviet Academy of Science and immediately talked to head of NASA and said, you know, hey, you've gone to the moon, but we've had this little space station. Why don't we get together in some joint meeting? It was decided that the United States and the Soviet Union would do a joint Apollo-Soyuz, and I was chosen as the commander.
When we first flew into Moscow and they came to the United States, we'd all heard a lot of bad things about the other country. It was really almost instantaneous, though, getting together and understanding each other. We were in the same business. We were all dealing with spacecraft.
His granddaughter is named after my daughter. And my grandson's middle name is Alexei, named after him. You know, we're very close friends, very close. He's like a brother to me. We kept politics, all that, completely out of it.
Меня очень приятно удивило то, что американские астронавты оказались очень подготовленными людьми для космического полета. Ну, а если так, шутку немножко чего удивило, то, что они у себя дома никогда не едят борщ.
3, 2, engine sequence start. 1, 0, launch commit. We have a liftoff. All engines building up thrust. Moving out. Clear the tower.
Roger, tower clear. Apollo Houston, I got 2 messages for you. Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys. Have fun.
All righty, sounds good. Apollo Vina, Mila, Alexei.
Contact. We have succeeded. Everything is excellent.
Soyuz and Apollo are shaking hands now.
Apollo-Soyuz was a great mission, and it opened up the Iron Curtain. It was the end of Apollo. It was a great, great era.
Glad to see you.
It is fantastic. It was very big symbolic. We conducted our program perfectly. It was only beginning of our future cooperation.
And so it was a demonstration to the whole world that 2 countries with different languages, different units of measurements, and certainly greatly different political systems could work together for a common goal.
Lift off.
Roger, roll, Endeavour.